Berlin, 1840. Imagine a city on the cusp of greatness, a vibrant tapestry woven with grand boulevards and the thrum of burgeoning industry. Horse-drawn carriages clattered across cobblestone streets, factories belched smoke into the Prussian sky, and ornate buildings rose in testament to a new era of prosperity. This was a city of progress, of innovation, a beacon of ambition in the heart of Europe. But beneath its polished, bustling surface, far from the gas lamps and the celebratory chatter, lay a secret world, a stark, chilling counterpoint to the city above. This hidden realm was not one of forgotten catacombs or ancient crypts, but something far more mundane, yet infinitely more profound: the ice cellars. For centuries, these subterranean chambers had served a vital, practical purpose, preserving food and drink for the city's taverns and breweries, acting as the refrigerators of a pre-industrial age. Now, in the harsh dawn of the 1840s, they had taken on a new, desperate role. They had become homes. These weren't just temporary shelters. For hundreds, perhaps thousands, they were permanent dwellings. Imagine living where the sun never reached, where perpetual darkness was broken only by the flicker of a stolen candle or the faintest sliver of light from a distant grate. How did people survive in such an environment, steeped in damp earth, breathing the stale, frigid air, their lives confined to spaces originally designed for barrels and blocks of ice? The sheer resilience, or perhaps the sheer desperation, required to endure such conditions is almost unfathomable. A fleeting glimpse into these subterranean abodes reveals a grim reality. The air was thick with the smell of earth, damp and unwashed bodies. Space was a luxury, with families often huddled together in cramped earthen rooms. The cold was a constant bone-aching companion, seeping into clothes, chilling every breath. Hygiene, a concept barely understood by the city's poor above ground, was an impossibility below. Waste accumulated, disease festered, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to conspire against their survival. This was the profound paradox of Berlin's hidden homeless. The very structures built to preserve the city's provisions, its beer and its meat, became the last, desperate resort for human survival. The Industrial Revolution, a force promising progress and prosperity, had cast a long, dark shadow. As factories drew thousands from the countryside into Berlin, the city's infrastructure crumbled under the weight of explosive population growth. Housing, already scarce, became a luxury for the working class and an impossibility for the truly destitute. These forgotten souls were the unseen casualties of progress, the dispossessed, the homeless, seeking refuge in the most unlikely and inhospitable places imaginable. They were the men, women, and children for whom the grand avenues and burgeoning industries offered no solace, no shelter, no hope. The scale of this subterranean population was astounding, a testament to the depth of urban poverty that festered beneath the veneer of 19th-century European advancement. How did they find warmth in the eternal cold? How did they scavenge for food and water in such isolation? How did they forge a semblance of life, of community, in an environment so utterly hostile to human habitation? These were the questions that haunted the few who dared to peer into Berlin's hidden depths. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The journey into these subterranean dwellings begins with understanding their original purpose. Berlin's ice cellars, like those across Europe, were sophisticated feats of engineering for their time, predating mechanical refrigeration by decades. They were the lifeblood of breweries, taverns, and even some private estates, essential for preserving perishable goods, especially ice harvested from frozen rivers and lakes during winter, which would then be used year-round to keep beer, meat, and dairy cool. Their construction was deliberate. Deep excavations, often 10 to 20 feet below ground level, lined with thick brick or stone walls, sometimes incorporating double walls with insulating air gaps. Domed ceilings helped trap cool air, and narrow ventilation shafts, carefully positioned, allowed for minimal air exchange without compromising temperature stability. These were dark, damp, naturally cool spaces, perfect for their intended use. However, the 1840s brought an unprecedented upheaval. The Industrial Revolution, a period of immense technological and economic transformation, also triggered a massive demographic shift. Rural populations, dispossessed by agricultural changes or lured by the promise of factory work, flooded into Berlin. The city, unprepared for such rapid urbanization, simply could not provide adequate housing. Tenements became overcrowded, rents skyrocketed, and the poorest found themselves with nowhere to go. This was the genesis of the ice cellars transformation. As the housing crisis deepened, the city's underbelly, its forgotten or disused spaces, began to fill. Many ice cellars, particularly those belonging to defunct businesses or located in less desirable areas, lay abandoned or only partially utilized. For the ice cellar dwellers, the dispossessed, the homeless, these dark, cold cavities, once repositories for ice and ale, became a desperate last resort. What began as a temporary refuge from the harsh Berlin winter or the prying eyes of authorities soon evolved into semi-permanent dwellings for hundreds, then thousands. Life below ground was a daily struggle against elemental forces. The lack of natural light was perhaps the most immediate hardship, condemning inhabitants to a perpetually twilight existence. Fresh air, filtered through narrow shafts or seeping from cracks, was scarce and often stale. Sanitation was virtually non-existent. Human waste and refuse accumulated, turning these damp spaces into breeding grounds for disease. Heating was an impossible dream. Any attempt at an open fire would quickly fill the cellars with suffocating smoke, making the bone-chaching cold an inescapable companion. Yet within these isolated pockets of despair, micro-societies began to form. Shared adversity fostered a crude form of community. Families and individuals, bound by their common plight, developed intricate survival strategies. Resourcefulness became paramount. Scavenging for food in the city above, begging, or even petty theft were daily necessities. Water, a constant concern, was often drawn from contaminated wells or collected from drips within the cellars themselves. The ice cellar dwellers were ingenious in their struggle, patching holes, fashioning crude bedding from straw or rags, and finding ways to signal their presence to one another in the gloom. For a long time, this hidden world remained largely invisible to the authorities. Urban poverty and societal neglect were powerful antagonists, allowing such widespread destitution to fester beneath the city's grand facade. The official neglect stemmed partly from ignorance, partly from indifference, and partly from the sheer scale of the problem. However, as the 1840s progressed, whispers and rumors began to surface. Social reformers and journalists, driven by a nascent sense of social justice, started to venture into these forgotten depths. Their early reports, often filled with shock and dismay, offered the first glimpses into the lives of Berlin's subterranean inhabitants. They described the squalor, the despair, but also the remarkable resilience of those living in conditions few could ever imagine. These accounts began to peel back the layers of the invisible problem, forcing a discomforting truth into the city's consciousness. The poignant tales unearthed by these early observers painted a vivid picture of the human element thriving, or rather, enduring, amidst unimaginable squalor. They spoke of children born and raised beneath the earth, their skin pale from lack of sunlight, their eyes accustomed to perpetual gloom. They documented families huddled together for warmth, sharing meager scraps of food, their lives a testament to sheer willpower. One account described an elderly woman, her face etched with hardship, who fashioned intricate dolls from discarded rags, selling them surreptitiously on the streets above to buy a handful of potatoes. These were not just statistics, they were individuals, each with a story of loss, resilience, and an unyielding fight for survival. Yet, this fight came at an immense cost. Health and disease were constant companions in the ice cellars. The cold, damp air, combined with the complete lack of sanitation, created a fertile breeding ground for a host of devastating illnesses. Tuberculosis, the dreaded white plague, ravaged the weakened lungs of the inhabitants. Cholera, spread through contaminated water sources, often the very drips from the cellar ceilings that provided their only hydration, swept through these subterranean communities with terrifying speed. Respiratory issues, skin infections, and malnutrition were endemic, turning every day into a battle against the body's slow deterioration. Life expectancy was tragically short, and children rarely reached adulthood untouched by sickness. Mainstream society, when it bothered to acknowledge these hidden dwellers at all, often viewed them with a mixture of fear and contempt. The ice cellar dwellers were frequently stigmatized, dismissed as moral failures, criminals, or simply the undeserving poor. This social stigma served to further isolate them, reinforcing the walls of neglect that separated their subterranean world from the bustling city above. Their plight was seen not as a symptom of systemic urban poverty, but as a personal failing, a convenient narrative that absolved the authorities and the more fortunate citizens of any responsibility. However, as the grim reality began to seep into public consciousness through the efforts of social reformers and journalists, early attempts at intervention slowly emerged. Charitable organizations, often spurred by religious conviction, would occasionally venture below, offering meager provisions, blankets, or basic medical aid. These efforts, though well-intentioned, were often insufficient against the overwhelming scale of the problem. They were temporary bandages on a gaping wound, unable to address the root causes of the housing crisis or the systemic neglect. The eventual decline of these ice cellar communities was not a sudden event, but a gradual process influenced by several factors. As Berlin continued its relentless march of urban development, many of the older, disused cellars were simply filled in, built over, or repurposed. New housing initiatives, albeit slow and often inadequate, began to offer some alternatives for the working poor, drawing some away from the subterranean depths. Forced removals by authorities, as awareness of the health risks and social issues grew, also contributed to their dissipation. By the turn of the 20th century, the era of the ice cellar as a widespread dwelling for the dispossessed had largely faded. A dark chapter in Berlin's history closed, but not forgotten. Today, architectural traces of these historical ice cellars are rare, often buried beneath modern foundations or repurposed beyond recognition, yet their legacy endures. The story of Berlin's ice cellar dwellers serves as a powerful, haunting reminder of the hidden costs of progress and the enduring human capacity for resilience in the face of extreme adversity. It compels us to ask timeless questions. What does a society owe its most vulnerable? How do we balance rapid economic growth with social welfare? And what unseen struggles persist beneath the polished surfaces of our own cities today? The echoes of 19th century urban poverty resonate in modern homelessness and the hidden communities that still exist, often just out of sight. The ice cellar dwellers remind us that true prosperity cannot be measured solely by grand boulevards and burgeoning industries, but by the well-being of every citizen, even those living where the sun never reaches. It encourages an intellectual call to action, to look beyond the visible, to question narratives of progress, and to remember the forgotten lives beneath our feet. for their struggles are a mirror reflecting our shared human condition and our collective responsibility.